Conflict over land was common in the early days of Wyoming. Prior to the coming of the railroad in the late 1860s, settlement was restricted to areas along the California-Oregon Trail in the central part of the territory and the Overland Trail in the south. The settlements were stage and telegraph stations, along with a few trading posts and military forts. Fort Laramie was the most populated area of settlement. In the late 1860s, enterprising individuals began to drive cattle from Texas to southern Wyoming to feed the railroad crews. Soon large herds were established in the open range around Cheyenne. By late 1875, Johnson County in the Powder River country was created, and cattlemen, taking advantage of the absence of Indians and buffalo, began moving their cows into the area using government land for grazing. In 1881, enough settlers had taken advantage of the Homestead Act and settled the area to have the county organized. As more homesteaders came into the county, the relationship between them and the cattle barons became tense. The Wyoming Stock Growers Association, WSGA, was created in 1872 to organize the cattle industry in the territory and later the state. They became a powerful political organization. From their palatial headquarters in Cheyenne, they pushed through the 1884 Maverick Act. This act granted the WSGA ownership of unbranded cows and restricted who could take part in roundups. Overgrazing, mismanagement, and the Great Blizzard of 1886-87 cut into the profits of the cattle barons. The cattle barons blamed the homesteaders for their declining financial situation, accusing them of rustling. By 1889, the situation in Wyoming became deadly. In July of that year, on the Sweetwater River, west of Casper, a homesteader and rancher, Ella Watson, later known as Cattle Kate, and her boyfriend, Jim Arable, were lynched. Ella and Jim had each claimed a homestead on land and water that a wealthy cattleman, Albert Bothwell, wanted. Bothwell and agents of the WSGA were responsible for the lynching. They were arrested, but before the trial, all the witnesses were killed or disappeared. Soon other individuals, deemed as rustlers by the WSGA, were killed. The small ranchers retaliated, killing some WSGA detectives and forming the Northern Wyoming Farmers and Stock Growers Association, the NWFSGA. One of the founders of the NWFSGA was a Johnson County cowboy named Nate Champion.
Now, Wyoming belongs to me and the big cattle companies. Anyone who says otherwise, they just ain't gonna live long.
Nate Champion was now marked for death by the WSGA. On November 1st, 1891, an assassination squad of 6 men was sent to kill Champion. The cabin was so small that only 2 gunmen were able to fit in. Champion grabbed the pistol he had under his pillow. The 2 assassins were wounded. one mortally. The other assassins fled. Two men were with Champion when he later learned the name of the assassins. This information was to prove fatal. Ranger Jones and John Tisdale were shot from ambush a few days apart on their way home from Buffalo, Wyoming. These murders shocked the residents of Johnson County. Both men were well liked and respected in the community. Neither were associated as rustlers. The WSGA, under the leadership of Frank Walcott, decided it was time to clear their political and economic rivals from Johnson County. An expedition of 50 men, made up of Wyoming cattlemen, political leaders, newspaper reporters, WSGA detectives, and 23 Texas gunmen, was organized under the tactical leadership of Frank Canton. Frank Canton, who deserves his own video, was a former sheriff of Johnson County and a man who played both sides of the law. The group would be known in Wyoming and Johnson County history as the Invaders. Canton had a list of 70 men described as rustlers who were to be killed or driven out of the state. On the list was the current Johnson County Sheriff, William Red Angus, who supported the homesteaders. The Texans were paid $5 a day and $50 for each man on the list they killed. In today's money, that would be about $168 and $1,685 respectively. The Texas gunmen and other members of the group assembled in Cheyenne and took a special train to Casper, Wyoming. At Casper, they acquired horses, cut the telegraph wires, and proceeded to Buffalo. The original goal of the Invaders was to get to Buffalo as soon as possible and kill Sheriff Angus and his deputies, the county commissioners, and other leading citizens of Johnson County. They then could kill any other homesteader or rancher the WSGA deemed as a threat. Time was crucial. Before the Invaders left Cheyenne, difficulties occurred. The relationship between Canton and Walcott became strained at the start. In Casper, as the horses were unloaded, some broke loose and ran off. Collecting runaway horses took time, and not all were recovered. This required some of the gunmen to ride in 3 wagons the Invaders brought to carry supplies, slowing them down more. Not too far from Casper, one of the wagons broke, requiring more time to transfer men and supplies to the 2 remaining wagons. The next day, nature attacked. Wyoming is notorious for spring blizzards, and in the early morning of April the 7th, one hit the Casper area. The Invaders spent a miserable day slogging through the snowstorm and did not reach the rendezvous point until late in the afternoon of April the 8th. Further contention developed here when the group received information that Nate Champion and Rick Ray were at the KC Ranch 14 miles to the north. Wilcock and the Wyoming cattlemen wanted to eliminate Champion since he could connect them with the assassination attempt on his life. Canton favored heading directly to Buffalo and eliminating the men on the list. The issue was put to a vote, and the cattlemen won. They faced another cold, snowy night, arriving at the cabin on the KC Ranch at daybreak. Wilcott's orders were simple. Shoot down every man in the cabin when he comes out, and be careful how you place your shots.
This is where the KC cabin was.
4 men were at the cabin: Nate Champion, Rick Ray, and 2 trappers. When the first trapper came out, for whatever reason, no one shot. The trapper was captured when he went down to the river for water. Not long after, the second trapper came out and was captured. The invaders learned that Nate Champion and Rick Ray were the other two men in the cabin. About 30 minutes later, Ray left the cabin. Walcott ordered the Texas Kid, a well-known gunman, to fire. Ray was shot, and a hail of bullets followed. Champion emerged from the cabin door, firing rapidly. He put down his gun and dragged Ray into the cabin, where he died. For the next several hours, the invaders fired on Champion. Champion, for his efforts, kept up an effective counterfire, wounding 3 men, 2 of them seriously. Time was slipping by, however, and both Champion and the invaders were at a stalemate. Jack Flagg and his stepson, Alonzo Taylor, passed the KC Ranch. Flagg was mounted, and his stepson was driving a wagon loaded with hay. Flagg was recognized by some of the invaders as one of the men on the death list, and they began to fire on the two. Flagg and his stepson made it safely across the bridge. The gunman then backed off. Taylor cut loose one of the wagon horses, and the two rode quickly to Buffalo. Invaders now, however, had the means to drive Champion out of the cabin. The wagon, abandoned by Flagg and Taylor, was pushed against the cabin and set ablaze. Soon the entire cabin was burning. With a pistol in one hand and a rifle in the other, Champion bolted from the flaming cabin. He ran along a ravine south of the cabin, using the smoke from the burning cabin as cover. The besiegers could only get a glimpse of him as they shot in his direction. As Champion emerged from the smoke, he ran into 2 of the Texas gunmen. He got off 1 stray shot.
Champion saw them too late, for he overshot his mark just as a bullet struck his rifle.
The Texans were more accurate, 1 bullet hitting him in the right arm and a second shot hitting him in the chest. He was then hit by several other bullets, a total of 10. One of the invaders placed a placard on Champion's chest, reading, "Thieves beware." During the siege, Champion kept a journal. Journal records Champion's thoughts and observations during the gun battle.
The house surrounded by armed stockmen who were firing at us. Just 9 o'clock. Nick is dead. If I can stand him off until tonight, I will try and break for liberty. Boys, I feel pretty lonesome just now. I wish there was someone here with me so we could watch all sides at once. There was a man in a buckboard and one on horseback just past. They fired on him as they went by. I don't know if they killed him or not. I seen lots of men come out on horses on the other side of the river and take after him. Well, they just got through shelling the house like hail. I heard them splitting wood. I guess they're going to fire the house tonight. I think I will make a break when night comes, if alive. Shooting again. I think they will fire the house this time. It's not night yet. The house is all fired. Goodbye, boys, if I never see you again.
The journal was given to Walcott, who read it and then tore out several pages. Eventually, one of the reporters, Sam Glover, got hold of the journal. The journal records Champion's thoughts and observations during the gun battle. Glover published 2 accounts of the Champion Journal, the first in the Douglas, Wyoming's Budget on April 13th, the second 3 days later in the Chicago Herald. The April 13th account is much shorter than the April 16th, and the second article is more polished than the first. The original journal was never seen after the gunfight. Did Glover embellish the Chicago Herald story and destroy the original journal for his own benefit? Late in the afternoon of 9 April, the supply wagons arrived and the invaders had a hot meal. This delay again created tension between Wolcott and Cannon. The presence of the invaders was now no longer a secret, but they still believed they had the initiative. At 9 p.m., the march to Buffalo was resumed. The invaders had ridden hard for 5 hours. They exchanged horses at an Allied ranch, and around 6 a.m. arrived at the TA ranch. While at the TA ranch, one of the invaders was thrown from his horse and shot in the knee. As the invader leaders debated what to do with the injured man, a rider from Buffalo arrived with disturbing news. The town was up in arms, with about 250 men heading south towards the invaders. They also reported that the plot to kill the sheriff and his deputies never materialized. With their horses exhausted and the armed force headed towards them, the decision was made to fortify the TA ranch and call on the cavalry to rescue them. The Battle of the TA ranch was to follow. Thank you so very much for watching this video. And if you like this type of content, please hit the like button, give me a comment, and if you haven't, subscribe.